The morning frost clung to the windows of Miller's Diner like delicate lace, but inside, the warmth barely reached the corner booth where Maya Chin sat hunched over a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Her fingertips traced the rim of the chipped ceramic mug, a nervous habit she'd developed during the 3 months since losing her job at the local textile factory. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across her tired features. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya was 23, though the weight of constant worry had aged her beyond her years. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, strands escaping to frame a face that would have been striking if not for the exhaustion etched around her dark eyes. She wore the same faded jeans and gray sweater she'd worn for the past 4 days, the only clean clothes left in her meager wardrobe. The breakfast rush at Miller's Diner was in full swing, but Maya remained invisible in her corner, nursing the single cup of coffee she could afford. She'd been coming here every morning for weeks, not because she enjoyed the bitter brew or the cracked vinyl seats, but because it was warm, and the elderly owner, Frank Miller, had a kind heart that allowed her to linger without judgment. Through the large front window, Maya watched the morning commuters hurry past on Maple Street. Business suits, designer handbags, expensive shoes clicking against wet pavement. A world that felt increasingly distant from her own reality of unpaid bills and dwindling hope. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and checked the time on her cracked phone screen. 7:45. Soon she'd have to leave for another day of job hunting, another day of polite rejections and false promises. What Maya didn't know was that she had been observed. Every morning for the past 2 weeks, a small figure had pressed his face against the window of the building across the street, watching her ritual with the intensity of someone studying a fascinating puzzle. The boy was 8 years old, with sandy brown hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to hold conversations his voice never could. His name was Tyler Harrison, and he hadn't spoken a single word since the car accident that took his mother's life 18 months ago. Tyler's routine was as predictable as Maya's. Every morning at 7:30, he would position himself at the large window in his father's corner office on the 3rd floor of Harrison Industries, a mid-sized tech consulting firm that occupied the converted brick building across from Miller's Diner. From this vantage point, he had a perfect view of the diner's interior, and more specifically of the young woman who sat in the same booth every day. There was something about her that captured Tyler's attention in a way nothing else had for months. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, a mixture of vulnerability and quiet strength that reminded him of his mother in her final days at the hospital. Or maybe it was the kindness she showed to Frank Miller, always greeting him with a genuine smile, despite her obvious troubles. Tyler had watched her help an elderly customer with his coffee when the man's hands shook too badly to manage it himself. He'd seen her give her leftover muffin to a stray cat that wandered near the diner's back door. Tyler's father, Marcus Harrison, was a successful entrepreneur who had built his consulting firm from the ground up after his wife's death. Work had become his escape, his way of avoiding the crushing silence that filled their home whenever Tyler wasn't responding to his attempts at conversation. Marcus threw himself into 14-hour days, client meetings, and business trips, leaving Tyler in the care of a rotating series of nannies and tutors who meant well but couldn't bridge the gap between father and son. This particular morning, Marcus was already deep in preparation for a crucial presentation to potential investors. His office, usually immaculate, was scattered with financial reports, marketing projections, and prototype designs. He'd been working since 5 a.m., sustained by nothing but black coffee and nervous energy. The presentation could secure the funding needed to expand Harrison Industries nationwide, but it also meant he'd be traveling more, spending even less time trying to reach his increasingly withdrawn son. Tyler sat quietly in the leather chair by the window, supposedly working on his homeschool assignments, but his attention was entirely focused on the diner across the street. He'd brought his sketchpad today, something he rarely did anymore, and had begun drawing the scene he witnessed every morning. His pencil moved with careful precision, capturing the way morning light filtered through the diner's windows, the curve of Maya's shoulders as she leaned over her coffee, the gentle expression on her face when Frank stopped by her table. Hiwa, Dr. Sarah Reeves, Tyler's child psychologist, had encouraged him to draw as a form of expression since traditional verbal therapy hadn't yielded any breakthroughs. She believed that Tyler's selective mutism was his way of protecting himself from further loss, that somewhere in his young mind, he'd decided that speaking might invite more pain. The drawings were windows into his inner world, she'd told Marcus, and they should be encouraged. But Marcus barely noticed the sketches anymore. He was too consumed with keeping the business afloat and maintaining the facade that everything was under control. He told himself that Tyler would eventually come around, that grief took time, that throwing himself into work was actually helping provide for his son's future. The truth was, Marcus was drowning in his own grief and didn't know how to save either of them. On this particular Tuesday morning, the routine was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. Marcus had stuffed his leather wallet into his coat pocket while rushing to grab coffee from the break room. The wallet contained not just his credit cards and business identification, but also the only photograph of Tyler and his mother together that he carried everywhere. It was a precious reminder of happier times, taken just weeks before the accident that changed everything. As Maya prepared to leave Miller's Diner, she folded the newspaper she'd been reading, checking the classified ads one more time for any job opportunities she might have missed. The rain had started again, a steady drizzle that made the November morning feel even more depressing. She pulled up her hood and stepped outside, immediately feeling the cold moisture seep through the worn fabric of her jacket. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and Maya walked with purpose despite having nowhere urgent to be. She'd learned that purposeful movement made her feel less like a victim of circumstance, and more like someone temporarily between opportunities. The sidewalks were slick with rain and fallen leaves, and she kept her eyes down to avoid puddles that would soak through her already damp sneakers. It was near the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, right outside the Harrison Industries building, that Maya spotted the wallet. It lay half-hidden beneath a small pile of wet leaves, the expensive leather dark with moisture. For a moment she hesitated. Her first instinct was to keep walking. Getting involved in other people's problems had never brought her anything but complications. But something about the wallet's placement, so vulnerable and exposed, tugged at her conscience. Maya glanced around quickly. The morning crowd had thinned, and no one seemed to be searching frantically for a lost item. She picked up the wallet, surprised by its weight and quality. This wasn't some cheap imitation leather. This belonged to someone who could afford the best. She opened it carefully, noting the meticulous organization inside. Credit cards arranged by frequency of use, business cards in a separate compartment, and a small stack of cash that probably represented more money than Maya had seen in months. But it was the photograph tucked behind the driver's license that made her breath catch. A beautiful woman with kind eyes held a small boy with sandy brown hair. The woman was laughing, and the boy was looking up at her with pure adoration. There was something about the boy's face that seemed familiar, though Maya couldn't place where she might have seen him before. The driver's license identified the wallet's owner as Marcus James Harrison, age 34, with an address in the prestigious Hillcrest neighborhood. The business cards confirmed what Maya had suspected from the wallet's quality. This man was successful, CEO and founder of Harrison Industries, according to one card. Another identified him as a member of the City Business Council. Maya stood there in the drizzle, holding this stranger's life in her hands. The smart thing would be to turn it in to the police and let them handle it. But she'd had enough interactions with bureaucracy lately to know that could take days, maybe weeks. And that photograph suggested this wallet contained more than just financial instruments. It held memories. From his perch at the 3rd-floor window, Tyler had been watching the entire scene unfold. He'd seen the woman from the diner. His woman, as he'd come to think of her, discovered something on the sidewalk. When she picked up what looked like a wallet, Tyler's attention sharpened. When she opened it and paused, studying something inside, he found himself pressing closer to the glass. Tyler had been drawing these morning observations for weeks, creating an entire portfolio of sketches featuring the mysterious woman from Miller's Diner. He'd captured her in dozens of poses and expressions, from contemplative to sad to occasionally briefly happy. He'd drawn her helping others, sitting alone, walking with determination despite her obvious struggles. In his 8-year-old mind, she'd become a character in an ongoing story, someone whose daily struggles reminded him that he wasn't the only one dealing with difficult circumstances. Now, watching her examine the wallet with such careful attention, Tyler felt a strange urgency. He wanted to run downstairs, to somehow communicate that the wallet belonged to his father. But Tyler hadn't spoken to anyone in 18 months, and the very thought of trying to form words made his chest tight with anxiety. Instead, he did what he always did when emotions overwhelmed him. He reached for his sketchpad and began to draw with fevered intensity. This scene was different from all the others. This wasn't just another morning observation. This felt important, like a moment that would change everything. Maya made her decision. She would return the wallet personally, not because she expected a reward, but because that photograph deserved to get home safely. She looked up at the Harrison Industries building, noting the modern glass entrance and the security desk visible through the lobby doors. This was going to be awkward. A woman in her condition walking into a place like that would definitely attract attention. But as Maya approached the building's entrance, she didn't notice the small face pressed against the third-floor window, or the way that face suddenly came alive with recognition and something that might have been hope. Tyler's pencil moved across the paper with new energy, capturing this moment when his two separate worlds were about to collide in ways none of them could imagine. The security guard at the front desk looked up as Maya entered, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed suspicion as he took in her wet clothes and nervous demeanor. This was exactly what she'd been dreading, but there was no turning back now. She approached the desk with as much confidence as she could muster, the wallet feeling heavier with each step. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Marcus Harrison was completely unaware that his entire life was about to change direction. He was reviewing his presentation notes one final time, occasionally glancing at Tyler, who seemed unusually focused on his drawing. Marcus had no idea that his wallet was missing, no idea that a young woman downstairs was about to demonstrate the kind of integrity that had become increasingly rare in his world. And Tyler, clutching his pencil with white knuckles, was about to witness the moment when the woman he'd been watching from afar would walk into his real life, carrying with her the power to change everything for his family. For the first time in 18 months, Tyler felt something that resembled excitement, though he couldn't have explained why if anyone had asked. The stage was set for an encounter that would prove that sometimes the most significant moments in our lives begin with the smallest acts of decency, and that kindness, when least expected, has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know were still bleeding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The security guard's nameplate read Vincent Torres, and his weathered face suggested years of experience dealing with all kinds of visitors to Harrison Industries. He set down his crossword puzzle and studied Maya with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to assess threats and intentions quickly. The marble lobby gleamed around them, all polished surfaces and expensive furnishings that made Maya acutely aware of the water dripping from her jacket onto the pristine floor. "Good morning," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I found this wallet outside your building. It belongs to Marcus Harrison, and I'd like to return it to him." Vincent's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't unusual for people to try creative approaches to gain access to the building, though this was certainly more original than most. He gestured for her to approach the desk, noting how she moved with careful precision, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "You found Marcus Harrison's wallet?" Vincent asked, his tone neutral but curious. "Where exactly?" "Right outside, near the corner of Maple and 3rd. It was under some leaves." Maya placed the wallet on the polished marble counter between them. "I checked the ID to make sure I had the right building." Vincent picked up the wallet, immediately recognizing the expensive leather case Marcus carried everywhere. He'd seen it countless times over the past 3 years, usually when Marcus was fumbling for his access card during their brief morning exchanges. The weight and quality were unmistakably genuine. "Did you look inside?" Vincent asked, though his tone had already shifted from suspicious to merely cautious. "Only enough to find the ID and make sure it was his," Maya replied honestly. "There's a photograph. It looked important." Something in her tone, the way she said important with such careful respect, caused Vincent to really look at her for the first time. Beneath the worn clothes and obvious financial struggles, he saw integrity. It was something he'd learned to recognize during his 25 years in security work, first in the military and now in corporate settings. This young woman could have easily pocketed the wallet's contents and disappeared into the city anonymity, but instead she was standing in an intimidating lobby, dripping wet and clearly nervous, trying to do the right thing. "What's your name, miss?" Vincent asked, reaching for the phone. "Maya Chen." "Well, Miss Chen, let me call Mr. Harrison and let him know you're here. Please, have a seat. He gestured toward the comfortable seating area near the elevators. Would you like some coffee while you wait? You look cold. The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly brought tears to Maya's eyes. She'd grown accustomed to suspicion and dismissal over the past few months. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. 3 floors above, Marcus was pacing his office while reviewing his presentation slides one final time. The potential investors were arriving in 2 hours, and everything had to be perfect. Harrison Industries had reached a critical juncture: expand nationally with investor backing, or remain a regional player with limited growth potential. The decision would affect not just his company's future, but also his ability to provide the kind of life he wanted for Tyler. His phone rang, interrupting his mental rehearsal of key talking points. Mr. Harrison, this is Vincent downstairs. There's a young woman here who says she found your wallet. My name's Maya Chen. Marcus automatically reached for his back pocket, then his jacket. His heart sank as the reality hit him. The wallet wasn't just missing. It had been missing all morning, and he'd been too preoccupied to notice. That wallet contained his access cards for the building, his credit cards, and most importantly, the photograph of Tyler and Claire that he carried everywhere. She found it where? Marcus asked, already moving toward his suit jacket. Outside the building, sir. She seems legitimate, brought it straight here instead of just turning it into the police or keeping it. I'll be right down. Marcus glanced at Tyler, who was still positioned by the window with his sketch pad. His son looked unusually alert today, more engaged with his surroundings than he'd been in weeks. Tyler, I need to go downstairs for a few minutes. Stay here and keep working on your drawings, okay? Tyler nodded without looking away from the window, his pencil moving steadily across the paper. If Marcus had looked more closely at the sketch, he might have noticed that Tyler was drawing the interior of the building's lobby, with remarkable detail for someone who spent most of his time on the 3rd floor. But Marcus was already heading for the elevator, focused on retrieving his wallet and getting back to his presentation preparation. Maya accepted the coffee from Vincent gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm ceramic mug. The lobby's heating system was working overtime against the November chill, and she could feel the sensation returning to her fingers for the first time all morning. She'd positioned herself in one of the leather chairs where she could see the elevator bank, curious despite herself about the man whose wallet she'd found. The photograph had revealed something about Marcus Harrison that his business credentials couldn't. The way he'd looked at the woman in the picture, the protective way he'd held his son. These weren't the expressions of someone who'd achieved success at the expense of everything else. There was love there, and loss too, written in the careful way the photograph had been preserved and positioned in the wallet. When the elevator doors opened and Marcus Harrison stepped out, Maya recognized him immediately from his driver's license photo, though the man approaching her looked more stressed and tired than his official picture suggested. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark brown hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all morning. His charcoal gray suit was expensive and well-fitted, but there were tension lines around his green eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Marcus spotted Maya immediately. She was the only person in the lobby who didn't belong to the corporate world that defined his building. As he approached, he was struck by how young she looked, and how she held herself with quiet dignity despite her obviously difficult circumstances. Miss Chen? Marcus extended his hand as she stood to greet him. I'm Marcus Harrison. Vincent tells me you found my wallet. Yes, sir. Maya shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that suggested he hadn't always worked behind a desk. It was right outside your building. I wanted to make sure it got back to you safely. Marcus felt a wave of relief as Maya handed him the wallet. He opened it quickly, checking for the photograph first, then scanning the credit cards and cash. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. This is incredible. I didn't even realize it was missing. Thank you so much. You're welcome. I'm just glad it found its way back to you. Marcus studied Maya's face, recognizing something he'd seen in his own mirror during the darkest days after Claire's death. The look of someone fighting to maintain hope against increasingly difficult odds. Her clothes were clean but worn, her shoes practical but obviously past their prime. Yet she'd taken the time and effort to return his wallet personally instead of taking the easier path. Can I ask why you didn't just turn it in to the police? Marcus asked. It would have been less trouble for you. Maya hesitated, then decided on honesty. The photograph inside, the woman, and the little boy. They looked important, personal. I thought you'd want it back as quickly as possible. The observation hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Claire and Tyler in happier times, captured in a moment of pure joy that felt like a lifetime ago. That's my wife and son. My wife passed away 18 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, but Maya's tone carried genuine sympathy, not the automatic condolences Marcus had grown tired of hearing. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Marcus found himself reluctant to end the conversation, though he couldn't exactly explain why. There was something about Maya's straightforward honesty that felt refreshing after months of carefully managed business interactions and well-meaning but ultimately empty social pleasantries. "Are you from around here?" Marcus asked, then immediately wondered why he was prolonging the conversation when he had a crucial presentation to prepare for. "Born and raised in the city," Maya replied, "though I've been spending most of my time lately looking for work. The textile factory where I worked closed down 3 months ago." "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Honestly, anything legitimate that pays enough to cover rent and food. I'm not picky." Maya's smile was rueful, but not bitter. "I have experience in manufacturing, some basic computer skills, and I'm a fast learner. But the job market's been tough." Marcus nodded, understanding more than Maya realized. He'd built Harrison Industries from nothing after Claire's death, partly as a way to channel his grief into something productive, partly because he'd needed to prove to himself that he could still create something meaningful. The early days had been brutal. Endless rejections, meetings with investors who saw only risk, nights when he'd wondered if he was fooling himself about his abilities. "What did you do at the textile factory?" Marcus asked. "Quality control, mostly. Made sure the products met specifications before they went out to customers. I also helped train new employees and sometimes filled in for supervisors when they were short-staffed." Maya paused, then added, "I know it doesn't sound like much, but I was good at it. I care about doing things right." Marcus believed her. The fact that she'd gone out of her way to return his wallet personally was evidence of someone who cared about doing things right, even when it was inconvenient. From the 3rd floor, Tyler had been watching the lobby through his window with growing excitement. He'd seen his father emerge from the elevator and approach the woman from the diner. His woman, the one he'd been drawing for weeks. Tyler pressed his face against the glass, trying to read their body language, wishing desperately that he could hear their conversation. This was the closest Tyler had ever come to having his two worlds collide. The silent woman he'd observed from afar was now talking to his father, the two most important figures in his current reality finally occupying the same space. Tyler's pencil moved frantically across his sketchpad, trying to capture this historic moment, though his hands were shaking slightly with nervous energy. Dr. Reeves had told Tyler that healing often came in unexpected ways, that sometimes the universe provided exactly what we needed when we were ready to receive it. Tyler had never understood what she meant before, but watching his father and the kind woman from the diner talking together, he felt something shift inside his chest. A flutter of possibility he hadn't experienced since before his mother's accident. Back in the lobby, Marcus found himself genuinely reluctant to let Maya leave. There was something about her presence that felt calming in a way he hadn't experienced in months. She listened without trying to fix things, spoke without hidden agendas, and demonstrated the kind of integrity that had become increasingly rare in his business world. "I know this might sound presumptuous," Marcus said, "but would you be interested in having lunch sometime? I mean, as a thank you for returning the wallet." Maya looked surprised. "That's very kind, but you don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly why I'd like to take you to lunch," Marcus replied. "Because you did what anyone should do, but most people wouldn't have." Maya considered the offer. Marcus Harrison seemed genuine, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he understood what it meant to struggle, despite his obvious success. But she was also acutely aware of the gulf between their circumstances. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harrison, but I'm not sure we have much in common. You're a successful businessman, and I'm unemployed and barely keeping my head above water." "Maybe that's exactly why we should have lunch," Marcus said gently. "Sometimes the most interesting conversations happen between people who see the world differently." Maya felt herself wavering. When was the last time someone had invited her to lunch just to talk? When was the last time anyone had shown genuine interest in her perspective on anything? There's a small cafe about 2 blocks from here, Marcus continued. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet tables. Tomorrow at noon? Maya started to decline automatically, then stopped herself. What did she have to lose? Okay. Tomorrow at noon. Marcus smiled, and for the first time that morning, the tension lines around his eyes relaxed slightly. Riverside Cafe, on Oak Street. Do you know it? I'll find it. Maya gathered her jacket, preparing to leave. Thank you for being so kind about this. Thank you for being the kind of person who returns lost wallets to strangers, Marcus replied. It means more than you know. As Maya walked toward the lobby doors, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Not because of the lunch invitation, though that was certainly unexpected, but because of the brief reminder that kindness could still be found in unexpected places, and that doing the right thing sometimes led to more than just personal satisfaction. Vincent watched the entire exchange with the professional interest of someone who'd learned to read people quickly. He'd seen Marcus Harrison interact with dozens of business associates, potential clients, and company employees over the past 3 years. This was different. Marcus looked more relaxed than Vincent had seen him in months, and the young woman walked out with her shoulders straighter and her step lighter than when she'd arrived. From his third-floor perch, Tyler had witnessed something he couldn't fully understand but instinctively recognized as important. The woman from the diner had entered his father's world, and instead of rejection or dismissal, there had been a connection. Tyler added careful details to his sketch, trying to capture not just what he'd seen, but what he'd felt while watching, a sense that maybe, finally, something good was about to happen. As Marcus returned to the elevator, wallet safely in hand, he found himself thinking less about his upcoming presentation and more about tomorrow's lunch. For the first time in 18 months, he was looking forward to a conversation that had nothing to do with business, nothing to do with therapy sessions or well-meaning advice about moving on. Just 2 people talking honestly about their lives, their struggles, and maybe finding some common ground in their shared understanding of what it meant to keep going when everything felt impossibly difficult. 3 months had passed since Alexander's awakening, and Portland's autumn rain drummed against the windows of his penthouse apartment overlooking the Pearl District. He had been discharged from the hospital 2 weeks earlier, against Dr. Harrison's recommendations, but the sterile environment had begun to feel like a prison. Sarah had advocated for his release, arguing that familiar surroundings might help trigger memory recovery. The penthouse was a revelation of the man he had become during those lost 8 years. Minimalist furniture, expensive art that felt cold and impersonal, a wine collection worth more than most people's annual salaries. Everything was perfectly arranged, professionally cleaned, and utterly devoid of warmth. Walking through it was like touring a museum dedicated to a life he couldn't remember living. Sarah had been coming by daily as his private nurse, an arrangement that had raised eyebrows at the hospital but which Alexander had insisted upon. Her presence was the only thing that made the cavernous apartment feel like a home rather than a showpiece. "The board meeting is in 2 hours, Alexander said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. It was his first official return to Sterling Tech since the accident, and the weight of expectations pressed down on him like a physical force. Sarah watched him struggle with the Windsor knot, noting the tremor in his hands that always appeared when he was nervous. "You don't have to prove anything to them today," she said gently. "Just be yourself." "That's the problem," Alexander replied, his reflection meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I'm not sure which version of myself they're expecting." Over the past weeks, Alexander had been studying not just the company's financials and strategic plans, but also video recordings of his previous board presentations. The man on those screens was confident to the point of arrogance, dismissive of dissenting opinions, and focused solely on metrics and profit margins. Watching himself operate with such cold efficiency had been deeply unsettling. "Maybe they need to see the version of you that questions whether growth is worth the human cost," Sarah suggested. "The version that remembers that companies are made up of people, not just numbers." Alexander turned to face her directly. "Victoria called yesterday. She strongly suggested that I follow her lead during today's meeting. Let her handle the complex strategic discussions, while I focus on quote-quote recovery and adjustment. She made it sound like I'd be doing everyone a favor by stepping aside." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd consider her advice." Alexander's smile was grim. "I didn't mention that I've been doing my own research into those acquisition deals she's been pushing. Did you know that Meridian Systems has been flagged by 3 different regulatory agencies for data privacy violations? And Dataflow Analytics is hemorrhaging talent because of toxic management practices. Sarah felt a surge of pride watching Alexander piece together the implications of Victoria's proposed deals. Despite his memory loss, his fundamental intelligence and ethical instincts remained intact. The Sterling Tech headquarters building rose 45 stories above downtown Portland, its glass facade reflecting the gray October sky. As Alexander's car pulled up to the executive entrance, he could see reporters and photographers waiting behind security barriers. News of his return had leaked, and the tech industry was watching to see if the visionary CEO could reclaim his empire. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. Sarah had wanted to accompany him, but Victoria had made it clear that the boardroom was no place for medical personnel. Alexander would be facing this test alone. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander entered. 12 faces turned toward him, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly hostile. Victoria sat in what had once been his chair at the head of the table, and she made no move to relinquish it. "Alexander," she said with a practiced smile, "welcome back. We're all so pleased to see you looking well." Alexander took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, noting how the power dynamics had shifted during his absence. "Thank you, Victoria. I'm eager to hear about the progress you've made." For the next hour, Victoria presented a comprehensive overview of Sterling Tech's operations under her leadership. The numbers were impressive. Revenue up 18%, operational costs down 12%, stock price at an all-time high. She had clearly positioned herself as the indispensable leader, who had not only maintained Alexander's vision, but improved upon it. "Which brings us to our next phase of expansion," Victoria continued, clicking a slide showing the proposed acquisitions. The Meridian and Dataflow deals represent a combined market opportunity worth $2.8 billion. With the board's approval, I recommend we move forward immediately. "I'd like to discuss the due diligence on these targets," Alexander said quietly. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. "Of course. Though I should mention that our legal and financial teams have already conducted extensive reviews. Both deals have been thoroughly vetted." "What about the regulatory issues with Meridian's data handling practices?" Alexander asked. "And the employee retention problems at Dataflow?" The room grew tense. Several board members exchanged glances, clearly unaware of these concerns. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. "Those are minor issues that can be addressed post-acquisition," she said dismissively. "The strategic value far outweighs any temporary challenges." "Temporary challenges?" Alexander's voice carried a new authority that surprised even him. "We're talking about potential privacy violations that could expose us to billions in regulatory fines. And Dataflow has lost 38% of their senior engineering staff in the past year. What exactly are we acquiring besides their problems?" Richard Blackstone, Victoria's ally, leaned forward aggressively. "Alexander, with all due respect, you've been away from operations for months. Victoria has been managing these details while you've been recovering. Perhaps we should trust her judgment on matters that require current operational knowledge." "Current operational knowledge," Alexander repeated slowly. "You mean the kind of knowledge that led to recommending acquisitions of companies with fundamental structural problems?" The confrontation was escalating beyond what Victoria had anticipated. She had expected the memory-impaired Alexander to be malleable, easy to guide and control. Instead, he was demonstrating the same analytical sharpness that had built Sterling Tech, but combined with a moral compass that the old Alexander had seemingly lost. "I think," said Dr. Patricia Coleman, "we need to step back and consider what's best for the company's long-term stability." "I agree," Alexander said, standing up, "which is why I'm calling for a comprehensive audit of all pending deals and strategic initiatives. We need to understand not just the financial implications, but the ethical and reputational risks as well." Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. "You can't be serious. You've been out of commission for months. You don't remember the strategic decisions that got us to this point. You're going to derail everything we've built based on what moral qualms about business realities?" "I'm going to make decisions based on what I believe is right," Alexander replied firmly. "And if that means walking away from deals that compromise our integrity, then that's what we'll do." The room erupted in heated discussion as board members took sides. Some supported Victoria's aggressive expansion plans, while others were swayed by Alexander's ethical concerns. In the chaos, Alexander quietly excused himself and left the building. He found Sarah waiting in the lobby, having anticipated that the meeting might not go well. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "How bad was it?" she asked as they walked toward the parking garage. "I think I just declared war on my own company," Alexander said with a rueful laugh. "Victoria made it pretty clear that she considers me a liability rather than an asset." "What are you going to do?" Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for weeks." She waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to say. "I've been trying so hard to figure out who I was before the accident, to recover those lost memories and reclaim that life. But watching those videos of myself, reading about the decisions I made, the way I treated people, I don't think I want to be that person again." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe losing those memories wasn't entirely a tragedy. Maybe it was a chance to choose who I want to be going forward." He reached out and took her hands, his voice becoming more intense. "These past 3 months, working with you, seeing the world through your eyes, you've shown me what it means to care about people as individuals, not just as resources or obstacles." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Alexander, I'm just your nurse. You're a billionaire CEO. We live in completely different worlds." "Do we?" Alexander asked. "Because the world I remember, the one I'm comfortable in, is a lot more like yours than the one I apparently built during those lost 8 years. I don't want the penthouse or the corporate empire if it means becoming someone who values profit over people." "You can't throw away everything you've built because of how you feel about me," Sarah protested, though her voice was shaking. "I'm not throwing it away because of how I feel about you," Alexander said softly. "I'm choosing to rebuild it because of who you've helped me remember I can be." Before Sarah could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Victoria had called an emergency board meeting to discuss Alexander's diminished capacity and the need for immediate leadership changes. "They're moving fast," Alexander said, showing Sarah the message. "Victoria's probably going to try to have me declared unfit and removed from the company." "Can she do that?" "If she can convince the board that my memory loss has impaired my judgment, yes. The corporate bylaws include provisions for executive incapacity." Sarah looked at the man who had become so much more than a patient to her. 3 months ago, he had been an unconscious stranger in a hospital bed. Now he was someone she cared about deeply, someone who had shown her that wealth and power didn't have to be corrupt, that success could be measured in more than just financial terms. "Then fight for it," she said firmly. "Not because you want to be a CEO, but because you want to prove that companies can be successful while still caring about people. Show them that the compassionate version of Alexander Sterling is stronger than the ruthless one ever was." Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all day. "Will you help me?" "I'm a nurse from Southeast Portland," Sarah said. "What could I possibly do to help you fight corporate executives?" "You can remind me why it's worth fighting," Alexander replied. "You can help me stay focused on what really matters." As they drove back toward the penthouse, both of them knew that the coming weeks would determine not just the future of Sterling Tech, but the future of whatever was growing between them. Victoria Blackwood had made it clear that she viewed Alexander's newfound conscience as a weakness to be exploited. But Alexander Sterling, the real Alexander Sterling, the one who remembered that success meant more than profit margins, was about to show her just how strong compassion could be when combined with determination and the support of someone who believed in you. The battle for Sterling Tech was far from over, but for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, Alexander felt like he knew exactly who he wanted to be and what he was fighting for. And that made all the difference. The Riverside Cafe was exactly as Marcus had described: unpretentious, comfortable, with mismatched chairs, and the kind of worn wooden tables that invited long conversations. Maya arrived 5 minutes early, having spent the morning alternating between excitement and anxiety about the lunch meeting. She'd chosen her best blouse, a navy blue cotton shirt that she'd been saving for job interviews, paired with her only decent pair of slacks. Marcus was already waiting at a corner table, looking more relaxed than he had the previous day. He'd traded his formal business suit for dark jeans and a gray sweater, an attempt to bridge the gap between their different worlds. When he saw Maya enter, he stood and waved her over, his smile genuine and warm. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Marcus admitted, as Maya settled into the chair across from him. "I almost didn't," Maya replied honestly. I kept thinking this was some kind of elaborate thank you gesture that would make us both uncomfortable. And now? Maya looked around the cafe, taking in the casual atmosphere and Marcus's obvious effort to choose somewhere she'd feel comfortable. Now I think maybe you actually wanted to have lunch with me, which is somehow more nerve-wracking. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising them both. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed spontaneously, without forcing it for Tyler's benefit or for some social obligation. Fair enough. I did want to have lunch with you. There's something about your perspective that I find refreshing. Their conversation flowed more easily than either had expected. Maya talked about her work at the textile factory, not with bitterness but with genuine pride in the craftsmanship and attention to detail that had defined her role there. Marcus found himself sharing stories about the early days of Harrison Industries, the failures and small victories that had eventually led to his current success. You built the company after your wife died? Maya asked gently, sensing this was important territory. Marcus nodded, stirring his coffee absently. Claire was an artist, a painter. She always said I was too practical, that I needed to learn to take creative risks. After she died, I think starting the company was my way of proving she was right, that I could create something meaningful instead of just managing other people's ideas. What kind of consulting do you do? We help businesses integrate new technologies without losing their human elements. It sounds technical, but it's really about helping people adapt to change without losing what makes them valuable. Marcus paused, realizing how that philosophy might resonate with Maya's current situation. Companies often think technology can replace human judgment, but they're wrong. The best solutions combine innovation with human insight. Maya considered this, like quality control at the factory. The machines could measure specifications, but it took human eyes to spot the problems that would matter to customers, things that were technically correct but somehow wrong. Exactly. Marcus felt a spark of excitement at her immediate understanding. That's the kind of thinking that makes businesses succeed long-term. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I'm sorry, this is Tyler's school. I need to take this. Maya watched his expression shift from casual enjoyment to concerned father as he answered the call. She could only hear his side of the conversation, but the tension in his voice was clear. What do you mean he's not responding? No, this has happened before. I'll be right there. Marcus ended the call and looked at Maya apologetically. I have to go. Tyler's having one of his episodes at school. He shuts down completely and won't respond to teachers or other students. The little boy in the photograph, Maya said, understanding immediately. He hasn't spoken since his mother died. The doctors call it selective mutism, but honestly, I think he's just protecting himself from getting hurt again. Marcus was already reaching for his wallet. I'm so sorry to cut this short. Don't apologize. Your son needs you. Maya stood as well. Is there anything I can do to help? Marcus paused in the act of throwing money on the table. Actually, this might sound strange, but would you come with me? Sometimes Tyler responds better to new people than to the same faces trying to reach him. Maya didn't hesitate. Of course. Riverside Elementary was a brick building with cheerful murals painted on the exterior walls, but the atmosphere inside felt heavy with concern when Marcus and Maya arrived. Principal Janet Morrison met them in the main office, her expression professionally calm but clearly worried. He's in the counselor's office, she explained, leading them down a hallway lined with student artwork. Mrs. Patterson has been with him for an hour, but he won't make eye contact or acknowledge that anyone's speaking to him. Through the office window, Maya could see Tyler sitting in a small chair, his back rigid, staring at his hands folded in his lap. The school counselor, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, sat nearby, speaking softly but getting no response. Marcus entered the room first, kneeling beside Tyler's chair. Hey buddy, I came as soon as I heard. Are you okay? Tyler didn't look up, but Maya noticed his shoulders relax slightly at his father's voice. She remained in the doorway, not wanting to intrude but ready to help if needed. Tyler, Marcus continued gently, I brought someone with me. Do you remember yesterday when I went downstairs to meet someone who found my wallet? This is Maya. She's the one who made sure it got back to us safely. At the mention of the wallet, Tyler's head lifted slightly. His green eyes, so much like his father's, flickered toward Maya with curious recognition. She saw something in his expression, Not just awareness, but a kind of knowing that seemed impossible for an 8-year-old. Maya approached slowly, instinctively understanding that Tyler needed to control the pace of any interaction. She knelt down so she was at his eye level, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hi, Tyler," she said quietly. "Your dad told me you like to draw. I used to draw when I was your age. Not very well, but I enjoyed it." Tyler's gaze sharpened, focusing on her face with an intensity that was startling. Maya felt as though he was studying her, comparing her to some internal reference point. "What do you like to draw?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. For a long moment, Tyler remained silent. Then, slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a worn sketchpad. With careful deliberation, he opened it to a specific page and turned it toward Maya. Maya's breath caught. The drawing was remarkably detailed for a child's work, a perfect rendering of Miller's Diner, complete with the corner booth where she sat every morning. But it wasn't just the accuracy that shocked her. It was the perspective. This drawing had been made from above, from someone looking down at the diner from a higher building. "Tyler," Maya said softly, "did you draw this from your dad's office?" Tyler nodded once, his eyes never leaving her face. Marcus leaned over to look at the drawing, confusion evident in his expression. "I don't understand. Tyler, how do you know about this place?" Tyler flipped to another page, revealing another drawing of Maya, this one showing her walking down Maple Street in the rain. Then another page, Maya helping an elderly man with his coffee. Another, Maya feeding the stray cat behind the diner. "You've been watching me," Maya said, not accusatory but amazed. "Every morning." Tyler nodded again, then did something that stunned everyone in the room. He pointed at Maya, then at his father, then brought his hands together, fingers interlocked. Mrs. Patterson gasped softly. He's never initiated communication like that before. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Tyler, are you trying to tell us something about Maya and me?" Tyler flipped to the final drawing in his pad, a sketch he'd made the previous day of Maya and Marcus, talking in the lobby of Harrison Industries. But this drawing was different from the others. Above the figures, Tyler had drawn what looked like rays of sunlight breaking through clouds. Maya understood first. "You think we're supposed to know each other?" Tyler smiled for the first time in the room, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Then, in a voice rusty from disuse but clear enough for everyone to hear, he whispered, "You make Dad happy." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. After 18 months of silence, Tyler had found his voice to express something he'd observed that the adults had been too complicated to see clearly. "Tyler," Marcus managed, his voice thick with emotion, "you've been watching Maya every morning?" "She's kind," Tyler said, his voice growing slightly stronger with each word. "Like Mom was kind, but different kinds, brave kind." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. This child, dealing with his own tremendous loss, had been watching her struggle through her difficult mornings and had somehow seen strength where she'd felt only desperation. "Tyler," Maya said gently, "would it be okay if I visited you and your dad sometimes? Maybe you could show me more of your drawings." Tyler's smile widened. "You could come for dinner. Dad doesn't cook very good, but we could order pizza." Marcus laughed through his tears, looking at Maya with an expression of wonder and gratitude. "Would you like to come for dinner tonight? Tyler's right about my cooking." "I'd love to," Maya replied, meaning it completely. 3 months later, Maya sat in the same corner booth at Miller's Diner, but everything else had changed. She wore a professional blazer over a crisp white shirt, the uniform of her new position as Quality Assurance Manager at Harrison Industries. Marcus had created the position specifically for her, recognizing that her attention to detail and commitment to doing things right were exactly what his growing company needed. More importantly, she wasn't sitting alone. Tyler sat across from her, his latest sketchpad open between them, chattering excitedly about his art class at school. His selective mutism had gradually faded as he'd learned to trust that the important people in his life weren't going anywhere. "Maya," Tyler said, looking up from his drawing, "are you going to marry Dad?" Maya nearly choked on her coffee. "Tyler, that's a very personal question." "But you love each other," Tyler said matter-of-factly. "I can tell from how you look at each other. It's like how Mom and Dad used to look at each other, but different." "Newer." Before Maya could formulate a response, Marcus slid into the booth beside her, having just finished parking the car. "What are we talking about?" "Tyler was just asking me about," Maya began, then stopped, realizing Tyler was grinning mischievously. I asked Maya if she's gonna marry you, Tyler announced proudly. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Tyler, we've talked about giving people privacy for their feelings. But it's not private, Tyler protested. Everyone knows, even Frank knows. He gestured toward the diner's owner, who was indeed watching their table with an approving smile. Marcus looked at Maya, whose face had turned several shades of red. I'm sorry, he's been more outspoken since he started talking again. It's okay, Maya said, then surprised herself by adding, he's not wrong, you know. Marcus went very still. What part? About how we look at each other. Maya met his eyes directly. About what that might mean. Tyler clapped his hands together. I knew it! I knew it when I drew that first picture of you together. You fit! Marcus reached across the table and took Maya's hand. You do fit. In ways I never expected, never thought to hope for. So is that a yes about getting married? Tyler pressed, clearly unwilling to let the adults dance around the subject any longer. Marcus and Maya looked at each other and burst into laughter. The sound was rich and genuine, the laughter of people who had found their way through loss and struggle to something neither had dared to hope for. I think, Marcus said, squeezing Maya's hand, that might be a conversation for Tyler to have with his new mom. Tyler's face lit up with pure joy. New mom? Maya felt her heart overflow. If you'll have me, Tyler, if you think you'd like me to be part of your family. I've been drawing you into our family for months, Tyler said seriously. I was just waiting for you and Dad to figure it out. As they sat in that familiar corner booth, surrounded by the warmth of Miller's Diner and the promise of a future none of them could have imagined just a few months earlier, Maya reflected on the strange turns life could take. A lost wallet, returned out of simple decency, had become the foundation for a love story that began with kindness and was built on the understanding that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected encounters. Tyler pulled out his newest sketch pad and showed them his latest drawing, 3 figures standing together outside a small house with a garden, all of them smiling. At the top of the page, in his careful 8-year-old handwriting, he'd written, My new family. Sometimes, Maya thought, the most important moments in life begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to do the right thing without expecting anything in return, the universe has a way of giving you everything you never knew you needed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.